Once more, Paul Craig Roberts with us to talk about our next topic. With all the changes going on in the country, the decline of the U.S., according to many prognosticators, many people are asking, how did this happen? Now, there's a growing school of thought that it is the, quote, New World Order. Other people say it's just the bad results of years of political correctness, of super liberal policies, all accumulating into a Tower of Babel now in this country, a balkanization of the U.S. Paul, you say it is intentional. Is this the New World Order or some other mechanism?
No, I don't think it's the New World Order.
There's gonna be a new world order out there.
No, I don't think it's the New World Order in the sense of it being the World Economic Forum's agenda.
That we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
I mean, I think that it's intentional for a number of reasons. I'll try to hit on some of them. Partly, it's just happening for unintentional reasons, or rather, it's happening because it serves the agendas of certain powerful interest groups that may not understand what's going on. And partly, I think it's influenced by the World Economic Forum's meetings.
We penetrate the cabinets,
which encourage overriding democratic processes, overriding the people ruled by elites. That helps create a mentality in which we can lose all our values and our institutions, law, for example. You know, we talked earlier in your programs about how law is now serves a social agenda, not justice in the traditional sense of innocence and guilt. You can be innocent, but you're guilty under the social agenda process of law. And so all of these things are part of it. When I say it's intentional, let me start with this. In the 1930s in Germany, there was something called the Frankfurt School. These were Jewish Marxists, and they were disappointed in the proletariat because during World War I, the proletariat, the Marxist proletariat, was supposed to come together and prevent war. You know, the Germans would say, we're not fighting the French or the British or the Russians, and the Russian workers are supposed to say the same thing, and the British, and all was supposed to prevent war because the proletariat was supposed to be the proletariat. It was the world proletariat. Instead, the proletariat each sided with their own government. So these Jewish, they were Jewish. They were Marxists, and they said, well, we can't allow the proletariat because, look, they didn't do what they were supposed to do. And so they created what they said was cultural Marxism. Marxism would have to work through the culture, not through the labor forces. And what they would do, they called it the march through the institutions. So they would take over institution after institution after institution and revolutionize those institutions. Now, you yourself pointed out how this has happened to law in the law schools. Well, these people, I mean, you know, this was an intellectual operation. They didn't mean it that they themselves were going to take over and be the government. They just were finding a way for Marxism to actually overthrow the system because the proletariat had failed to do their job. But along came Hitler, and they were Jewish, and they had to flee. And they came to the US and then were entrenched at Columbia University. And so they infiltrated academia. And this was in the 30s. So they had decades for these ideas to ferment, spread, become influential, and go and finally have these results like we now see. So that is what I mean by intentional. It was intentional on the part of Marxists to undermine existing society, because that was the only way it could be done. So we see in the schools, they teach that if you're white, you're racist. They teach blacks to hate whites because whites are oppressors. And this is happened in all of the Western countries. In England, it's the same thing. You have famous universities like Oxford and Cambridge removing monuments to their own leaders because they were racist, or somebody says they are. Oh, I don't think people even thought in racist terms. This is a learned thing, you see. So you can see it there, like you yourself said. We can see it in the law schools. So it has essentially succeeded in eroding all of the institutions, and it's now. See, I can remember when Democrats and Republicans would offer different views of how the country should go. And the people would listen and decide which they thought was right. And so there wasn't Republican blocks and Democrat blocks only. I mean, there were some blocks. But you would say, okay, if you didn't think Hubert Humphrey had the right program, but Nixon did, or if you didn't think Nixon did, but John F. Kennedy did, it wasn't based on name calling and mudslinging and false charges. And today, you never hear a debate that has anything to do with any issue. So even the political parties are no longer, they're eroded out. They're empty. And everything is based on who can raise the most money to make the most charges against the opponent. And that's what an election campaign is. So all the institutions, I can't think of any institution today, public or private, that we can trust, because they've all lost their essence. And I see this as the great victory of cultural Marxism. And the only reason I mentioned that they were Jewish is that to explain how it got here from Germany. And it was because this was going on in the 20s and 30s, and the rise of Hitler, the Jews had to leave. If they had any sense, they left. And they got into Columbia, which was a very prestigious university, Ivy League type thing, and in many ways dominant, and still is. And from there, just these doctrines spread, little by little, or pieces by pieces. And all along the way, if I had time, I could call up all the different names and the different decades and who was doing the work. And this is basically what happened. They destroyed the structure of belief in the institutions that comprise Western civilization.
Right.
That's what happened. And this is why I said in an earlier program, I didn't think the United States had a future, because the structure of belief, except for the Trump people, and with the Trump people, it's not very articulate. It's sort of an emotional understanding, but they don't really intellectually have a grasp.
Right.
But when you have the structure of beliefs and institutions destroyed by the professionals in those institutions, it's the lawyers, the judges, the prosecutors.
Right.
You see what I mean? Like in law, and in the universities, the professors themselves and the administrators, they think the whole purpose is indoctrination to serve a social agenda. The notion of thinking for yourself, arriving at the truth, you're not allowed to do that. If you do that, you're outside the narrative. If you're outside the narrative, you're an enemy. And so this is the situation. This is why it's desperate.
Now, is this a well-meaning, although flawed, social agenda to bring justice and equality to all, or is there a financial thrust behind this as well? Because the corporations are piling on board as well. So this new order, if it's not the New World Order, the new order that they want to just bring in after displacing our traditions and our culture, to whose benefit is it? Just social justice warriors undriven by profit?
Mainly, it's certainly true that some companies are going to benefit from it financially. It doesn't mean they understand what's going on. But I think the reason we see the companies going along with it is they're university graduates. It's the same thing has happened to the ranks in business as is happening to the ranks in the legal profession. The same thing, I mean, they're doing the same thing in medical education.
And
the same thing, you know, wherever you, so if you're the chief financial officer or the CEO or any kind of executive, you're a university graduate. You've been through the same process that the law school people went through, that the doctors are going through, that, you know, it's endemic in the population. So it's not that it's a scheme that people are using for money and power. It's just the beliefs that we used to have been replaced after decades of attack on the traditional beliefs and growth and spread of the new beliefs. And the whole purpose came, once again, Larry, the reason this happened was the Marxists wrote off the proletariat and said the way we revolutionize society is we march through the institutions. And by that, they meant we take over the institutions, we empty them of the content that supports existing society and replace it with some other agenda. It becomes a different civilization. And so for the cultural Marxists, it was a way of revolutionizing the West that the Marxist proletariat had failed to do. And we are living with the consequences of this. It's not like there's a high-level intelligence operation going on, pulling strings, causing this to happen. It's not like that. It's not Klaus Schwab.
If we penetrate the cabinets,
or Bill Gates. They may be product of the same kinds of ideas that everybody else is.
But, you know, Bill Gates and Schwab and all that, they're still making money, but some of these corporations are going against their own profit motives, like this Bud Light decline when they went woke, and other corporations, Disney, for instance, they're losing business because everything there is woke now. So, I mean, how do corporate heads get away with threatening the bottom line? They're losing money. Why are they still CEOs?
They're getting away with it for the same reason Alvin Bragg's getting away with a fake legal case. It's the belief in existing institutions has been destroyed. And so the woman at Anheuser-Busch, that woman, they brought in that created this transgender beer, she thinks that the purpose of corporations is to achieve social agendas, because that's what they learn. It's not to make profits. Just like Bragg thinks the function of law is to get your enemies, not to find innocence or guilt.
But the boards of directors and the stockholders of these corporations are not trying to yank these woke CEOs from their positions because they're losing all these stockholders' money.
Well, the easiest thing for the shareholders to do is to sell the stock and get out, and which they've done because the valuation of the company dropped. The shareholders, who's going to go organize them to bring the case? That's a lot of work. And then if it's an intelligent person, they got to know, well, how many juries, how do we know people aren't going to agree that the corporation should be doing this, should be advancing these poor transgender people who are misunderstood and need our support? And when a culture loses the basis of its belief system, how do you defend it? You can't. And I think the way the shareholders do is they just sell the stock and they leave, and the company drops. The same thing happened to Disney. It happened to Gillette. Don't you remember the Gillette?
Yeah.
And, I mean, these people they coming into these jobs from universities. They get that frame of mind from universities, and they see themselves as progressives, bringing change. What the change is, it's erasing the traditional beliefs. And so if the function of a corporation is some social agenda, and this isn't new, Larry. Well, years ago, the liberals were pushing more and more responsibilities onto corporations. And at the time, Milton Friedman came up and made the argument over and over that corporations only have one responsibility, is to make money for the shareholders. And then people came and established teaching schools to teach judges and lawyers that the function of a corporation was to make money for its shareholders. It had no responsibility to customers,
Right.
no responsibility to communities, only to shareholders. Well, this then paved the way for all the offshoring. It's all right if you desert your community and take all the jobs out of it, because you're going to make more money if you put the operations in China. So that's what's happening. It's the belief systems are undermined, and the Trump supporters understand that the belief systems are being undermined. Moral belief systems are being undermined. You see at times it looks like they're trying to criminalize Christianity.
Yeah.
You see that at times.
Yeah.
So evil. There's no such thing as evil. If unless you're white male, white male's evil, but evil is gone. So it's not a plan somebody is putting in from Davos, Switzerland, or the UN, or it can look like that because people understand something's going on. Somebody's got to be doing this, but it's happening, I think, for the reasons I gave you. An alien explanation of Western civilization was imported here from Germany, from cultural Marxists, and it spread through the universities and has affected the way people are taught and how they think, and it has achieved a victory across the whole spectrum, from law to medicine to executives to wherever.
How do they reconcile offshoring with social justice, since offshoring jobs creates depressions in areas that formerly had manufacturing? How do they reconcile that?
Well, I'm the one that stressed that offshoring is a disaster. I've been stressing it for decades. And I debated all the people who were saying, "Oh no, this is dirty fingernail jobs. We're going to get better." No one ever paid any attention, and it may just be that the social justice agenda people haven't gotten to that yet, or it may simply be the corporations now, if they tried to bring the jobs back, there's not a workforce because nobody's been reporting to a manufacturing facility for 20 years or 30. How would they don't have a workforce. There's no supply chains. Where are they going to get the inputs? Because when the jobs left, all the little companies failed.
Yeah.
So where's the transportation systems? I mean, when you don't have an industry and you don't have manufacturing, you don't have the things it has to have to support it. So how do you get it going again? You see, it's a very difficult process. The Chinese developed almost instantly because we took it all over there and gave it to them. We moved our technology there, our business know-how there. You see what I mean? So this is why the CIA was so wrong. It had told the government it would be 50 years before China can compete with us. It was 5 years because we took it over and gave it to them. Well, how you get it back? Well, if you brought it back the next year or two, you'd still have a workforce. Some little companies might still be struggling. There would still be some infrastructure. But just think about it now. How many cities have the electric power to run these factories? You got blackouts, brownouts everywhere, even in California and Texas. Well, when you have, your two most powerful and your biggest states, and they have to ration electricity during part of the year, well, how are you going to have it? So you see, when you shoot yourself in the head, how do you recover? You don't.
Right. Paul Craig Roberts, again, another glum, but unfortunately accurate prognostication of what we're in now and what we're headed for. So, Paul, thanks for being with us, and we'll talk again.
Okay, Larry, it's important people know, because they live in the matrix. They live in false narratives. They're given false explanations, and they're just going to be unprepared.
Well, Paul, part of the false explanations is being provided by the mainstream media. That's one of my pet peeves, being a journalist most of my adult life. I've seen the severe change in the way stories are reported, the way reporters approach stories, the types of interviews they do, the loaded questions, the lack of objectivity that, just like in law school now, is being taught in journalism schools. Social justice can make up for there's objectivity should be replaced by social justice goals, and that's what's going on. You read an AP report now. They sound like editorials. They're supposed to be straight news reports. New York Times, Washington Post, that were once allegedly crusading newspapers with the Pentagon Papers and Watergate and all that. Now they're propaganda sheets. And the real danger here is, I mean, we see the difference, our generation, but the kids growing up today, I don't know if they could distinguish anymore between what's an objective report and what's an editorial.
Yeah, no, they can't, and they can't tell the difference between truth and falsity. They learn that certain views are acceptable and others aren't, and that's the limit. It doesn't ever occur to them, is the acceptable view true? Because that's not important. Because if they go against it, they're in trouble. They're in trouble in school. They're in trouble with their peers, or so it's just what's acceptable and what's not acceptable.
Yeah.
And what's acceptable is narratives that support the agendas. And so truth has nothing to do with it. I don't think in any way that there's any respect for truth. Certainly not in universities and not in trials. The reason you have trials is to get conviction, not to determine innocence or guilt. Just conviction. This is why 97% of them are self-incrimination with pleas.
Well, Nancy Pelosi recently declared that Trump will have an opportunity to prove his innocence.
Yeah. See, that's the way they think. You have to prove your innocence. This is like it was during the Stalin era.
Yeah.
The charge, you were guilty by being charged.
Right.
And unless you could prove you're innocent. So the guilt is established by the charge. And that's the way Nancy Pelosi thinks. That's the way the Democrats think. I think it's increasing the way everybody thinks.
Yeah.
Well, you wouldn't have charged them if you weren't guilty.
Right.
That's you hear this today from conservative, patriotic Americans.
Yeah. Now, the First Amendment and freedom of the press, it was set up as a watchdog over the government. And now that role is out, it's been replaced by support for the government, by propagandists and cheerleaders for the government. I mean, it's so pervasive now in the news media, with few exceptions. Fox News and New York Post, unless you're watching those, you wouldn't have even heard about the Hunter Biden laptop story for a year and a half until they finally grudgingly gave some acceptance, some coverage of the story. But I mean, this is how pervasive the grip of the mainstream media is. And now they're cracking down on internet stuff as well. So I don't know what kind of unbiased information we're going to get in the future, if any.
Well, the function of the mainstream media is not just government that it's serving the official agendas. And many of these agendas come from outside the government or imposed on the government, or the government represents the interest groups that these agendas are advanced by.
Good point.
So the media is essentially a ministry of propaganda for the secret agendas or whatever the agendas of the elites are.
Yeah.
And they're all in service to the revolutionizing of Western civilization. It's been overthrown. I think it has successfully been overthrown. And we see the only resistance is in Trump and his supporters. This is the only resistance that we have. There's no academic, resistance that I know of. I don't know of any group of scholars who are trying to say, wait a minute, we can't abandon truth. We can't make up lies about ourselves because we want to advance blacks. We have to respect facts, and we can't make decisions based on emotion. And where are they? I don't know of any groups. And we have Tucker Carlson pointing out idiocies of things, on his program on Fox News. But there's not any resistance to what's ongoing. I don't. There's a book just out by Claes Wren, a professor at the Catholic University in Washington, and he says that it's basically a failure of conservatism. That the conservatives never engaged the arguments I've been discussing, the cultural Marxism, and the conservatives got focused on elections and on politics, and they ignored the realm of ideas that was undermining the structure of beliefs. So, and you can see it. I mean, is the Republican Party behind Trump and the Trump supporters? No.
Right. Sure, he's a threat to them as well, to the Republican establishment. How much of a chance do you think Trump has of becoming president again?
Well, I think the Democrats intend him not to have a chance. So unless there's some kind of intervention that throws out this fake case, which the purpose of which is to prevent him from campaigning. I mean, how can you campaign if you have to be in court?
Yeah.
And plus, the whole time, the Democrats are going to be planting stories in the media about, right now there's 34 counts. They're all the same count, by the way.
Right.
Then they'll be saying a superseding indictment of 50 counts, and then a superseding indictment of 99 counts, and then a superseding indictment of 300 counts. And so they'll make ordinary people feel like it's even worse and worse and worse. And then all the Republicans like Mitch McConnell are going to be saying, "Oh, Trump's a liability. We have to move on. We have to move
Right.
on." So it seems to me that that's what the Democrats are up to, and it seems to me that unless there's some kind of extraordinary intervention into this that dismisses it all, disciplines Bragg, that it's going to be very difficult for Trump to campaign. And I don't see, unless the Republicans lose control of the House, I don't see how the Democrats could pass a law taking away former president's Secret Service protection.
Yeah.
So put Trump in prison.
Yeah.
That's what they'd have to do. How are they going to put the Secret Service in prison? We talked about that. But you just can't tell what's going to happen because elections no longer mean anything. They're stolen. The Democrats control all the big cities. Well, the population in a big city is usually a majority of that state. And so, or in the several big cities of the state, like in California. So they can steal the elections because they control the elections in the cities. Well, how can they be accountable? You can't be. How are you going to make them accountable? You can't. And we saw all the efforts to make the last two elections accountable. We have this Carrie Lake in Arizona still carrying on, trying to. You can't do it. The judges are Democrats. attorney generals are Democrats, the mayors, the governors. I mean, what you can't do anything about it. So it's like Stalin said, it doesn't matter who votes, it matters who counts the vote.
Right.
And so that's the situation here. Why would you respect an election that's going to undermine your social agenda when your commitment is to a social agenda? That's the thing to do. The election is, if it's going to undermine it, it's an enemy. You just fix it the way you want it.
Mm-hmm.
It all fits the same mentality you've already described. So this is, the elections they're meaningless. Trump won the last two elections.
Yeah.
But it didn't matter because they said he didn't. He had more votes the second time than he had the first time.
Right.
And somehow Biden had unbelievable votes. He had 20 million more than Hillary or Obama. Who believes this? Nobody could believe this. But they get away with it because, you see the Republicans, they don't want to discredit America's reputation.
Yeah.
If we say the election was stolen, it'll make America look bad.
Yeah, well, I'm sure the Rhino Republicans were not disturbed by Trump allegedly losing the last election. So.
Yeah, right. It's so, but I still fight. I mean, there's an old English poem, The Battle of Malvern Bridge, and the English Earl is there with his warriors trying to keep the Vikings at bay, and they're suffering heavy casualties. And the Earl says, "As our numbers grow smaller, our will must grow stronger." In other words, you don't give up. And so that's my philosophy. I agree with the English Earl. This was some 9th century poem. It's quite wonderful, actually. In the use of language, when you look at the achievement of language in this 9th century, I think it's a 9th century poem, you compare it with what the universities do today, we're barbaric.
Oh, yeah.
It's been a complete collapse in capability across the front in Western civilization. Don't you, Larry, that the most prestigious museums now no longer display the works of the most famous white artists because they're racist.
Yeah. It's unbelievable the cultural destruction that they're getting away with. And
well, we've finished up. I've enjoyed talking to you as always, and we'll do it again. Let's see what happens.
In the meantime, we'll remember the poem that you quoted about keeping up the fight.
Yeah, right. Keep it up the fight until they knock on our door.
Well, hopefully we'll get a chance to discuss things again.
Yeah.
Well, Craig Robert, thanks once again for your enlightenment. Thank you.
Okay, Larry, I appreciate your interest. I do.